to the Power of One. Today I'm going to be speaking with Daniel McIntyre, aka Danny Mac. He is the director of the Bureau of Reentry Coordination for the PA Department of Corrections. So this will be a little switch for us to speak to someone who deals with those who have committed a crime and to see what can be done so that does not happen again. Welcome to the show, Danny.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it, Melanie. And nice to see you.
You as well. Danny, please tell me a little bit about your work career and the position you hold now.
Sure. And I didn't realize this, but the camera does add 50 pounds as I look at my image. So I am currently, as you stated, the director of reentry coordination, and I'll get into that a little bit more. But I started my career back in the 80s, and I was a juvenile counselor for juveniles in a detention center. From there, I went to the adult system, and I spent 25 years with Dauphin County Adult Probation and Parole, and in different environments where I served on the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force for 10 years. I worked as a liaison for the Drug Task Force for much of my career. And then I retired from there as the deputy director of operations for Dauphin County. And I came to work for the state about 12 years ago. And within that capacity, I oversaw the field supervision side. And then I transitioned to the Department of Corrections, where I oversaw the Bureau of Community Corrections, where all the halfway houses, people getting released to our beds, our contract facilities. And then from there, back in 2000, they created a new bureau. And what they did was they took education and treatment services and reentry services, and there's all kind of siloed. And they took them and made them divisions all underneath one bureau so that we could all work together as a team to try to improve reentry operations. And that goes along with the legislators taking the parole board supervision side and merging that with the Department of Corrections. So we have better continuity of care, a warm handoff, better communications. We eliminated duplicative processes. And I'll be honest with you, during that time, I really realized that the first half of my career, I spent kicking doors down to arrest people. And the second half of my career, I've been kicking doors down to help people out. And during that time, I realized one thing is that I often was dealing with the same population, sometimes arresting the same person over and over again, or generations of families, 3 generations. I'd had the son on, the grandson on, and the father or the grandfather on supervision as a probation officer. And I'm thinking, we have to do something to change this scenario and break the intergenerational cycle of incarceration. So I started thinking that, what are they getting as they go back to prison? What resources are we giving them so that they're not coming back to the same environment with little hope and the same old habits that they had previously? And that's when I came to the state, I really started convincing that we really need to target our resources towards a reentry focused approach. And that's where the state was, and that's where they are. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about what we're doing with that. After all, what they say 95% now probably of people that go into prison are coming back out into our communities, and they're going to be our neighbors. So what are we doing to help them out? I think it's important that we take the steps necessary to assist them, provide them educational, vocational opportunities, and change. And that's currently what my job title is, basically giving the opportunities and the help to reduce the amount of crime victims that are associated with these individuals and make them upstanding, kind of like involved with the communities on a positive note. And many of them are. We need to tell the success stories more.
Now, this does not mean that you do not have compassion and empathy for those who are victimized.
No, in fact, on the other hand, I think we have more because we get to know a lot about the extent of the crime. We get to leave the history. We get to see what the victim's impact was, what the stories are. So I think the staff have more compassion for victims and families. And even the parole board takes in consideration victim impact statements. They can write them, they can see them in person. And that gives us an opportunity to work closely with the Office of Victim Advocate. I think it's important that we work closely. In fact, Melanie, that's where we met at Crime Victims Week at the Capitol, where you're hosting and working with OVA at the state level to provide victims a forum and to recognize that we do have victims associated with the crimes, and the Department of Corrections, why I was there, is representing Acting Secretary Harry in the department to say, yes, we understand that. And we want to ensure that we make victims as whole as we can. We either want to make sure that they're paying the restitution, that they're, complying with any geographical restrictions that the board may have imposed, that we're working with the victim advocate. And there's a lot of activities that occur that people don't really realize. And like they have days of responsibility inside the institutions where inmates actually take responsibilities for the crime, and they talk about that, and they bring victims in to talk about the impact that crime had on them. It might be that that person's not in there, but others can hear that and say, it's not just impacting me. I got to stop thinking about myself. We have victim awareness education classes that are mandatory inside Act 143. We have an apology bank that OVA has, and we work with them to kind of advertise that if the inmate wants to reach out to the families of the victims and, offer an apology. It has to be sincere. They have restrictions on that. And that goes through OVA. So OVA will first reach out to see if the victim's families or the victim are even willing to accept a letter of apology. And that's very strictly guided. So there's a lot of things going on that we recognize the impact these crimes have on victims, and we try to make them as whole as we can and ensure that as best we can, no further victims are associated with these individuals as they get released.
Now, the educational program, speak a little bit more about that and any statistics that you have, but how important is it for those who are serving time for them to be educated? Right.
I think it's important. And if you ask me, and I think a lot of people, education is the one true factor in reducing recidivism. There's been a lot of studies about the impact education has on an inmate population. Within the Department of Corrections, we have those 24 facilities. 23 have educational departments. One's a reception center that really doesn't. But within those, it's just like a normal school. You have a principal, you have a guidance counselor, you have librarians, you have vocational educational teachers that do Commonwealth secondary diplomas, that do GEDs. And I might mention that PADOC's graduation rate for GEDs is higher than the national average. I think the national average is around 73 to 75%. We're at 80 to 82% GED. So we're doing a lot of good things within our educational program. I think what people don't realize is that not only do we offer educational programs for, the Commonwealth secondary diploma GEDs, but we also offer vocational programs. We have, I think, 25 different vocational programs: welding, electrics, carpentry, warehouse, building trades, you name it. We're trying to make it so that, barber and cosmetology is a big one, that they have the opportunities when they get out to gain employment. I think the secretary said in the budget hearings, Acting Secretary Harry said that 75% of all individuals released in the community return, of those that return, 75% return within the first 12 to 16 months. That's where we have to put the stopgap. That's where we have to fill that gap in so that we're getting them employed. I read a study previously that 89% of all returns are unemployed. Currently, we have some great statistics with employment. I know the Community Corrections, BCC, the Bureau of Reentry Corrections has an 81% average employment rate, so they're doing pretty well. I also know that there's been a couple studies, and you asked me about that, Melanie, as far as the studies. There's a Bureau of Justice Statistics came out with a study, and I love this one because the size of the study. It was 404,638 individuals that were released from incarceration. It was from 30 different states. And the reason I really focused on it is because of how large the size was, but it went on to say that of individuals that were released, those that were involved in the educational system inside in prison were 43% less likely to recidivate. That supports the RAND study of 2013. It also has a 43% less likely to recidivate. But this study went on to say some other things, which I try to advertise really to the inmate population, is that, if you go on to get your associate's degree, your recidivism rate goes from 65%, which we all know, that's a terrible figure. We are reducing that figure. I heard that was down to 58% at the budget hearings. I hope that's accurate. And I believe it is. With our statistical people, we have great stats. But it went on to say that if you get your associate's degree, your recidivism rate goes from that down to 14%. And if you get a bachelor's degree, your recidivism rate goes to 5.6%. And if you get a master's or other degree, it goes down to 0% effective recidivism rates. So those are great numbers, and it's something we need to focus on moving forward, is that we give these individuals opportunities to have something to look forward to help them change and to impact in a positive way. It's just a good way to go.
Okay. Now, what is the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, JRB? Tell me about that.
So Justice Reinvestment Initiatives, we've had two. It's very overwhelmingly supported by both sides of the House and Senate. They passed one in 2012, which was effective in January of 2013, and that really impacted like what we did with technical parole violators. I think that was the biggest impact from that. I know they did some things with boot camp and stuff, and it really changed our philosophy of how we looked at technical parole violators, because many times those TPVs, as I'll call them, would go back for 14, 16 months on a technical hit. We got people committing new crimes that don't get that kind of time. So we looked at, the legislators looked at, should we do this with a limited amount of people going back, and should we limit the amount of time? And that's what they did legislatively. They gave 5 different opportunities for change. So they said there's 5 reasons that you could go back to prison for technical violations, and they targeted them. So they said basically that if it was sexual in nature, if it was a weapons violation of sexual in nature, assaultive behavior, if it was identifiable threat, or somebody that basically can't be situated or absconded, could be not safely diverted to a center, something like that. So those 5 different things, and they limited the amount of time. So on the first technical violations that occurred that they went back for, they would get up to 6 months. On the second one, up to 9 months, and on the third one and subsequent, up to 12 months. So that reduced the amount of prison population that was being involved with the technical parole violators. And really, Justice Reinvestment had a huge impact on that. And then that led to the 2019 Justice Reinvestment 2 initiative, which again was overwhelmingly supported. So that one really impacted, how we looked at the state drug treatment program, which at the time was called state intermediate punishment. It was what some believed was underutilized to address the growing opioid epidemic. Since 2010, our opioid cases have doubled within the institutions, and yet we weren't really addressing that population. It was stagnant around 900, 800, at one point went to 1,000, back to 900, and it really wasn't getting, because we had to have all the support of the judges, and it was a 2-year flat sentence that the judges imposed, and we had to take them back to the courts if they failed out and revoke them, and then they'd be coming back to us. This system allows the judges and DAs to weigh in, but it gives the department the ability to assess them, judge whether or not they should be in the program, and then place them in the program to address their chronogenic needs. And that's really what it's done. Our state drug treatment program is up to 1,500 participants now. Is a benefit for them that they can get in there, and it's still the same type of program where they go into the prison for several months. They do a therapeutic community for 4 months. They go to an inpatient program for 2 months. After that, they're released to either a halfway house or to a successful reentry home plan that's been approved by staff, and they do 6 months of outpatient, followed by supervision. And then if they slip up, which people do, if they slip up, then we reassess them and we might extend them. The legislators were awesome in the thought process of going from a 24-month flat program to allow us 6 months, a little bonus time, so that if we're not really positive or sure, we don't have to kick them out of the program. We can give them a little bit more time to try to change that. So it really targets that. They did some other things, short sentence parole cases where they don't have to see the parole board for certain offenses. There's a cost savings investment. It's all about the reinvestment portion of this. So those really have been impactful for criminal justice reform. So all on board.
Okay. Now tell me about the medication assisted treatment, in short, MAT, in the criminal justice system.
So yeah, we implemented that back in, I think, 2013 or 2014, and it was really started, I believe, with the pregnant females and the methadone and Cambridge Springs. It started there and it expanded. We use buprenorphine for those that are actively involved. It's usually oral. It's called, and God love me, saying these words are tough enough. Buprenorphine, or with this speech accent. I mean, my wife calls it a speech impediment. But after 35 wonderful years of marriage, I still say it's an accent. But I can't say some of those words, so I get a kick out of it. Suboxone, Sublocade, those are easier for me to say. We utilize those as different terminology. But Vivitrol has been involved with our system for years now, and it really is addressing the opioid epidemic in a way that it gives them the right to get involved with these drugs or blockers, so that when they come out, using an opioid won't impact them at all. It won't get them high. So there's a lot of technical stuff that I could try to relate to you, but I'd probably have you speak to Steve Sychek, who does our MATs, the statewide coordinator. Does a fantastic job. They're also working with the counties in Pennsylvania, and they have monthly meetings with these counties to implement MAT programs. And it really gives families and the individuals hope that they can change their behaviors and that they can become successful on MAT. It's just like any other disease. We need medication to be able to support it in many aspects. And don't get me wrong, some people can flat out just stop. And, that's an option. That's another way to go.
That's true. Now, within the system, the prison system, are there many that suffer from mental illness? And how are they being treated? And do you have any statistics on that?
Well, that's not within my bailiwick, but I have some statistics on that, because they did talk about that at the budget hearings. We do have an inpatient mental health facility, which is SCI Waymart. We also have a female inpatient facility, which is Muncie. We have units dedicated to that. So we have a large population. I was kind of surprised, but not surprised at the numbers that were spoken about for the budget testimony. It was about 35% of our population has been diagnosed with a mental health or intellectually disabled. And if you look at our population of about 35,000 males and about almost 2,000 females, so you're talking almost 12,000 men have been diagnosed with a mental health disorder, and probably 1,100 or more women. So that's a large percentage of our population, at least a third of that, up to 35%, that we're dealing with and that they're working with. We have over 250 psychiatrist staff that work with these individuals. They're very proactive. Lucas Milishik does a great job as the director of that area. And he could probably, again, be another guest on your show and give you a good half hour of what they do to support the mental health population. I know they get them stabilized prior to released. They medicate them appropriately. They make sure that they have medication walking out the door. We set up appointments. We have social workers. We have reentry pro agents on the insides. We have counselors, all working with individuals that are going to be coming back out in the community, ensuring that home plans are approved, or they're going to a center for a bed, or if even the max outs. They're working to ensure that the hard to place population, including obviously mental health, medical needs, those with difficult charges, sex offender, arsonists, stuff like that, are placed appropriately. We do not release to homelessness. The max outs would be the only case that might go into a homeless situation, but they work so hard to get them placement and get them housing prior to release. And I applaud them for those efforts. We do have severely mentally ill population. For the men, I think it's about 7% of our population. And then for the women, it's about double that. It's about 13 point something percent of our population are considered severely mentally ill.
Now, for that victim or co-homicide survivor that is watching this program, their lives have forever been changed. What would you say the most important aspect of your work is to ensure that when and if this person is returning back to the community, that they will not commit another crime? What do you think that most important aspect is that you do?
So I don't think anybody can ever guarantee they'll never commit another crime. I believe we can give them the tools and the resources to reduce the risk of committing further victimization and eliminating the contact. I think the Pro Board does an awesome job of really reviewing the cases and making sure that if there's victims associated with them, first they hear the victim side and they work with the conditions to ensure that the agents in the field are aware of the victim and if there's any geographical restrictions. We work very closely with Office of Victim Advocate, OVA, and we have agents that are trained in trauma-informed care. In fact, we're going to be a trauma-informed agency by the end of 2023. All of our staff will be trained. That's a great thing because not only are we recognizing trauma within our inmate population, we're also recognizing it within our population of staff because many have been through traumatic events and stuff, and addressing that. We are fortunate in Pennsylvania. We have reentry services offices. Deputy Secretary Kelly Evans created these reentry services offices in every facility, which addresses everybody coming out of incarceration and make sure that they have the tools necessary and the home plans and the resources needed that they can be successful on the outside. So it's really the choice as to what they do as far as success. And we do a warm handoff for them with the social workers and the counselors to the community reentry pro agents. And they then meet with every individual coming out and does an assessment and orientation, basically identifying their needs. You know, the pro agent themselves that supervise them work with the risks more and ensure community safety, but we also ensure community safety by providing them resources for the basic needs. And that's something that we do on a daily basis and work with them, assess them, see what, we can get them employment, we can get them resources. We have reentry services, lots. We have 11 of them, and they range from family reunification to mentoring, to workforce development, to sex offender programming, to housing, so many opportunities to try to impact somebody in a positive way. I think it's very beneficial that we're working with this population in such a dramatic way to try to eliminate those victims and any further crimes that occur. But obviously we can't do that all the time. We also looked, it was neat, human trafficking. We've had training on human trafficking now to identify not only is our population sometimes commits a crime, but they're also victims themselves, many instances of trauma and of other crime, including human trafficking. So we're identifying those, we're targeting the institutional and field staff to identify the incarcerated reentrant that might have had that human trafficking or that trauma involved with their lives, and identify them and give them the resources and the tools necessary to really ensure that they can deal with the population and have appropriate home plans and stuff that address the traumatic effect of what they've been through. So on both sides of the house, we're trying to eliminate that trauma.
Now it's offered to everyone returning, and it's up to them to follow through with that, because I'm thinking about the jobs, the employment. So everyone is given resources for them to say, listen, here's possible employment for you, and it's up to them to follow through.
Yes, I mean, they have to maintain employment. There's certain conditions that they have to comply with that the agent works with them on. Employment's one of them. They have to pay fines and costs. They certainly have to pay restitution. We're trying to make the victims whole, so that's part of it. But yeah, once they get a job and once they're established, we connect them with employment, or they connect themselves. We have great relationships. We work with CareerLink and others to ensure that if there's job opportunities out there, and right now, I mean, there's no better time to get employment than right now, because there's the workforce, there's more jobs than there are workers to fill those positions. So this is a great opportunity for our reentrant population to show themselves. And there's many benefits for employers to hire our reentrant population. And Brenda Hammerland, our workforce coordinator for the state, would be another great person to have on the show. She talks more than I do, believe it or not. And she would do a great job with telling employers, we have career fairs where employers come into the prisons and speak with those that are getting ready to release and look at the job opportunities. Not only do we have 25 vocational programs, but almost every inmate are employed. with jobs inside the facilities. They work for the correctional industries. They do different warehouse work. They build things. They're learning skills that can be utilized on the outside, and it helps them build the self-esteem that they need to be successful. And I think it shows the family. I mean, if you ever go to a graduation, you see how great it is on the outside. Imagine somebody that's on the inside that finally graduated and achieved something that has never been recognized for anything positive in their life. And getting that feeling is something they want to do again. It's one step at a time. And I tell you very quickly, there's a book I read to my grandsons. It was called The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. And the horse and the boy were in the woods. And the boy looked back to the horse and said, "I can't see a way through." And the horse says, "What can you see your next step?" And the boy says, "Well, yeah." And the horse says, "Well, just take that." Many times in life, we get so focused on the goal and we can't see it, that it's difficult for us to keep taking those steps. But if we just focus on the next step and don't look at how big that picture is and how difficult it is, Mac Miller said that sometimes we fail because we're so worried about, how far we have to go instead of looking at how far we've already come. It's important that they understand that, they can be successful. And those little things that earn that will reduce the amount of victims associated with crimes because they will be successful on the outside. And that's what our goal is. Community safety is our number one priority. How we get there, understand this is that in my career, what I talked about at length was that I saw that we needed to change the mentality. We can correct by locking people up. We can create community safety for a short period of time, but like I said, 95% are coming out. Or we can create community safety by changing the behaviors and giving them the tools and the resources to change those behaviors moving forward. And we can create community safety long-term through those changes.
Is there ever a time when victims or co-homicide survivors need to contact your office directly, or they will contact the Office of Victim Advocate?
Well, most of the time they do go through the Office of Victim Advocate because they track different things. And now there's a new reporting structure so that they are informed about releases and incarcerations and stuff. We obviously, are open to community reentry pro agents do have contact with certain victims. Their agents are open and discussing. But for the most part, it's easier if OVA is involved because then they can track the questions. If somebody doesn't follow through, then they can go up the chain of command because we have a great working relationship with them, and they will contact a manager or director and say, "Hey, we got this call and nobody's really addressing their concerns. What can we do?" And that's something that is important, that we have that relationship, and we do have that relationship. And that's why I was down at the Capitol. I'm so proud of the relationship we've built and the amount of communications that we have within the corrections and OVA.
Danny, I want to thank you so much for breaking so much down for us today.
Well, you're welcome. I hope my accent didn't kill everybody or speech impediment, depending on who you are.
You're
Thank
fine.
you so much for having me.
You're welcome.
Thanks for
Thank
what
you
you do.
so much. I hope you gain some understanding on what goes on in the Department of Corrections. Restorative justice is important, and it's not that everyone has to agree or be on board, but I know everyone agrees that the crime must stop across the world. Peace and love.